So, what does it really take to be a great American president? Is there some kind of master plan for getting it right, or is it just something we decide on way after the fact? Today, we're going to dig into the presidency by looking at the original vision, the historical report card, and the secrets that just won't go away. And it all kicks off with this guy, George Washington. Before he walked away from power, which was a huge deal back then, he left everyone with a final message. But this wasn't just a simple goodbye. It was basically a list of warnings, a playbook, you could say, for how to stop this brand new country from completely imploding. And this is that blueprint. See, Washington was there for all the arguments when they were writing the Constitution. He knew exactly what could tear the whole thing down. So his farewell address was more than just some friendly advice. It was him handing over the keys to the car with a very clear set of instructions on how not to drive it off a cliff. What's wild is just how much this stuff still hits home today. He warned everyone to avoid political parties because he was afraid they'd just create deep divisions and let, quote, unscrupulous men grab power. He was worried about a massive military, about getting buried in debt, and he hammered home the need for everyone to get a good education. Really, his whole message was a plea to be guided by solid principles, not by whatever seems like a good idea for selfish reasons at the moment. And look, this isn't just a historical curiosity. This quote from author Gordon L. Anderson really shows you how seriously people still take his advice. They see these warnings as real turning points, maybe even massive missed opportunities. Which of course brings up a pretty big question. Yeah, exactly. If Washington laid out the perfect plan, how did everyone else actually do? How did the presidents who came after him measure up? It's time to pull out the historical scorecard. For years and years now, historians and political scientists have been trying to answer that exact question by ranking the presidents. It's their attempt to step back from the day-to-day politics and get some kind of objective look at who really succeeded and who really, really failed. So how's it work? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. They survey scholars and ask them to rate the presidents on all sorts of things, like their leadership skills, how they handled crises, their character, you name it. This isn't just a popularity contest, it's a serious academic deep dive. And here's the crazy part. Across dozens of different surveys, over decades of time, a surprisingly strong consensus has popped up. While the politics of today are always shifting, the academic view on who nailed it and who dropped the ball has stayed incredibly consistent. The same names almost always end up at the very top and, well, at the very bottom. Okay, so at the top of the list, you've got the heavy hitters, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington himself, and FDR. They're pretty much always in that top tier, the titans of the presidency. But then you look at the other end of the spectrum. Guys like Franklin Pierce, Warren G. Harding, and especially James Buchanan are consistently ranked as failures, mostly because they're seen as being completely unable to deal with the crises that led right into the Civil War. And this whole idea of presidential greatness is, literally carved in stone at Mount Rushmore. In survey after survey, Lincoln is seen as the absolute peak of leadership, the guy who steered the country through its single greatest crisis. And Washington, the man who wrote the original Playbook, he's almost always right there beside him at number 2. Okay, but this is where our story takes a really interesting turn, because the history books are one thing, right? But what the public believes, that can be a totally different animal. So what happens when people feel like they're just not getting the whole story from their leaders? And that leads us to our final act, our absolute fascination with presidential secrets. It's a huge part of American culture, and it points to this really deep curiosity about what's really going on behind the scenes. And honestly, this takes us right back to Washington's warnings. When people feel like their leaders are just looking out for themselves instead of following principles, or that these political factions are hiding the truth, a gap of trust opens up. And what rushes in to fill that gap? Speculation, debate, and yeah, sometimes some pretty wild conspiracy theories. And man, have some of these topics had some serious staying power. For decades, people have debated whether we got the full story on JFK's assassination. There are still so many questions swirling around Martin Luther King Jr.'s death. And of course, more recently, all sorts of theories have popped up about 9/11. The very idea of a presidential book of secrets being passed down from one leader to the next, that's the ultimate symbol of this belief that there's a whole other history that we don't know about. So, how do we tie all this together? We've got the blueprint, the scorecard, and the secrets. Well, it turns out they're not separate things at all. They're all part of the very same story. When you lay it out, it's a pretty clear progression, right? First, Washington gives us the ideal path. Then, history comes along and judges how well everybody actually stayed on that path. And finally, when it seems like our leaders have gone way off course and that trust is broken, the public starts to look for answers in the shadows. And that right there is the heart of it. Our obsession with secrets isn't just random. It's often a direct symptom of the exact dangers Washington warned us about more than 200 years ago. The fear of hidden agendas, of political infighting, and of a government that just doesn't feel like it's accountable to the people anymore. Which leaves us with this final thought. When you look at the blueprint, the scorecard, and the secrets all together, you have to wonder, in a country that's struggling with the exact divisions he predicted, is Washington's 200-year-old advice the one thing we really can't afford to keep ignoring?